This is an icon. This is a global icon, an incredible manifestation of glamour. But the idea that there was a sort of an insecurity inside that, it doesn't seem to sound correct.
She wanted all men to love her. The one that she wanted to love her most was the one that got away, which was her husband.
Because of the 12-year age difference, that she might have looked at marriage and Charles as a bit of a father figure.
Hello and welcome to this True Royalty original programme with me, Laurence Llewelyn-Bowen. On this show, we are discussing Diana, the late Princess of Wales, and asking the question, was she the most insecure woman in the world? Joining me, Dickie Arbiter, who was the spokesperson for the late Princess of Wales and former Prince of Wales, now King Charles, and also Ingrid Seward, Editor-in-Chief of Majesty Magazine and author of Diana, the biography. Now, I love the fact that having written the book Diana, we are now basing an entire show around your quote that Diana was the most insecure woman in the world.
Well, she was very insecure because she craved attention. She craved to be loved and always had done ever since she can remember, I think. And the fact that her parents split up when she was very young. Now, they didn't necessarily split up when she was very, very young, but she was aware that there were arguments and there were things were not going well at a very young age. And she used to listen outside the door, which, of course, you're always taught not to do because you never hear anything good. But I think these were the sort of probably the groundings of her insecurity. And then she married a man who clearly did not love her.
Right.
So that would make you very insecure.
Slightly already. Now, obviously, Dickie, you worked with her, you spent an enormous amount of time with her. Is insecure a word that you felt comfortable about using about her?
She was intellectually insecure. She was intellectually naive. And I think that was one of her basic problems, because by her own admission, she was a bit of an airhead because she didn't get any O-levels at school. When she left school, she went to Switzerland, to Rougemont, to a finishing school. And after that, back to London and worked as a nursery assistant at a Little England children's creche. So she didn't have a lot to say, a lot to talk about. And she wasn't really able to formulate an intelligent conversation. I had tea with both her and the then Prince of Wales 3 days before the wedding, just the three of us. We just had tea and we were looking out down the Mall, and I sort of said to her, well, what do you think about 3 days' time? She said, well, it's very daunting. And that was it. That was some topic of conversation. And I tried to egg her on, and there wasn't a lot forthcoming. It was very much small talk.
I mean, this is so fascinating for an outsider because, you know, this is an icon. This is a global icon, an incredible manifestation of glamour, absolutely, epoch-changing as a person. But the idea that there was a sort of an insecurity inside that, it doesn't seem to sound correct.
Well, I think as Diana got older and more glamorous and more powerful, if you like, although she may not have seen it that way, she wanted all men to love her. But the one that she wanted to love her most was the one that got away, which was her husband. So she was sort of always on the lookout for the kind of adulation which she got from her glamour, but it didn't make her secure. And she actually did say to me, very shortly before she died, that she still felt insecure when she went out on royal, when she went out in public, that's a better way of saying it, because she thought that the people that met her would have preconceived ideas about her and might have read something in the papers, as she called them, that day that was unpleasant about her, and it made her feel very insecure. And I thought, this is extraordinary. This beautiful, iconic woman is deeply insecure.
Fundamental flaw.
Yes.
I mean, how was that to work with, Dickie? I mean, how can you support someone like that?
It was difficult to work with, but I want to rewind the clock slightly. When she started actually working and doing charitable work, the media wasn't fair on her. The press, the writing press wasn't fair on her because she was doing some terrific jobs. I was then reporting for the old LBC News Radio, and she was doing terrific work with youngsters, with older people, with people with disabilities, and she wasn't recognised for it. All the media were interested in, and I think Majesty were guilty of it too, was what she
Certainly
wore.
not.
What she wore, her hairstyle, what makeup, did she bite her nails, did she manicure her nails, was she wearing stockings, what shoes has she got? It was about Diana the clothes horse and not Diana the workhorse. And she found that very frustrating. And it took about 4 years for them to come around to say, hey, this woman is doing some terrific work. And then they majored on the jobs that she was doing. And I think that was part of her insecurity, that she wasn't being recognised for doing what she was doing on the charity field.
You've touched on her childhood, Ingrid, because obviously she came from a place of immense privilege. I mean, she wasn't royal, but she was very much in the upper echelons of the aristocracy. Daughter of an earl, lived the most fabulous life, in the most fabulous place compared to most people. But there was a hollowness to this.
I think there was a hollowness to it because her parents were so unhappy. And then her mother left, and Diana was only just over about 6. And she recalls, every time she sort of gave a little interview, she recalled the time that her mother left, and she heard the crunching of the tyres on the gravel. But she used to tell this to her therapist, and she had a lot of therapists, a lot of different therapists, who would all tell her different things. And in fact, her mother thought later on that Diana exaggerated this moment of her leaving and thought, that Diana never saw her again. But Diana regularly went to London to spend time with her mother, so she wasn't ripped away from her mother. It's just that the family unit was ripped away.
It was dissolved.
It was dissolved,
and
yes.
also because the older sisters were sent away to boarding school, weren't they? So and then this terrible custody battle that went on between the parents for custody of Diana and her brother.
Well, I think that Spencer was absolutely determined to, once he discovered his wife was having an affair, then his wife was leaving him for another man. And here's a great big aristocratic man from a very ancient family, and his wife's leaving him for someone that made wallpaper.
Nothing wrong with people that make wallpaper, Ingrid.
No, I know.
It's educated 2 of my daughters. I mean, But yeah, I mean, because there's always something, it feels almost historical, the reaction. This is the 1960s, but it could be the 1860s or the 1760s. And the Earl is absolutely appalled, isn't he? And
Spencer was humiliated, totally humiliated. And so he sided with his wife, Frances. He sided with Frances's mum, who thought he was quite wonderful and was thrilled that her daughter had married into the Spencer family. And they decided that actually Frances, Shan Kidd, as she later became, was a completely a bad one. She
they just called him a bolter.
A bolt. Well, that's what they did call her, and she was very hurt by that.
Yeah. Because Dickie, Diana's grandmother was incredibly close to the royal family, wasn't she? I mean, they were all in the same kind of circle. But
she was one of the late Queen Mother's ladies in waiting. And she did side with her son-in-law over the whole question of custody. Unfortunately, Frances went off the rails a bit. Not only did she have an affair, but she also started drinking. And this was something that really got to Diana in the later years, that every time Frances phoned, she'd had a few drinks, and inevitably she wasn't put through to Diana. But they kind of reconciled, but it was never a relationship, mother and daughter relationship. That
never
had gone.
Easy.
Had gone when Diana was 7.
But one of the things I do find quite interesting, though, is that Earl Spencer, for a father in the 60s, then became very engaged as a father, didn't he? He was very, very supportive of Diana, spent a lot of time with Diana. She herself said that he rather spoilt her.
He certainly did spoil Diana. She was the favourite. So the 2 elder daughters, he was really a family man, and he loved his children. And once Frances had gone, he was determined, and he'd won the custody. He was determined to make their lives as gorgeous and as wonderful as he could. And he had plenty of cash with which to do it. He built a swimming pool. There was tennis courts. There was cricket pitches. They had horses. They had dogs. It was just idyllic. Any child would love that. And Diana, became an absolute supremo at swimming and diving. And they had diving lessons. And on her, I think might have been her 6th birthday, they had an elephant for the party. I mean, why not?
As everybody
Why not?
does.
I know. Dickie had several.
Yeah, but I know that because Charles Spencer occasionally posts these wonderful Instagrams, and there was a picture of Diana sitting on the elephant, and him saying, "This was my sister's sixth birthday party."
But I think also, as well as the material spoiling, there was, he was very emotional towards her. He was a very emotional father, wasn't he? Again, which is quite unusual for the 60s. She must have grown up feeling very, very loved by her father.
I think she did feel very loved by her father, and she had a series of nannies who, being the kids, they probably treated rather badly.
Yeah.
But there was one who did stay. But of course, Frances hated the nannies because they were all young and blonde and good looking. But they really helped stick the family together. And Spencer was very aristocratic after his wife first left, and he'd eat alone in the dining room. And then the nanny, Mary Clark, I think, was the one who really got the family together. And he said, she said, "Why don't the kids all come and eat with you? Much more fun." And he was a very, very charming, lovely father. I don't think he'd been such a great husband because there's I think there's a lot of stories around the unhappiness that he caused Frances. But I think he was a very good father.
But unfortunately, all this came crashing down.
This is
when he married Rain. The girl Diana didn't know about it. The older girls might have known about it. Charles Spencer certainly didn't know anything about it. And this woman comes into their life and starts rearranging everything. And that, I think, was another contributing factor, that Diana had her father all to herself.
And then suddenly, like a fairy
suddenly
tale.
somebody else, yeah.
Exactly.
So then even more insecurity comes in because Rain's taken Daddy away.
Yeah.
Rain, go away, they used to say. They chanted, yeah.
And it was only in later life that they actually kissed and made up.
Yeah. But so this is also going on in the background of a tremendous familiarity with the royal family. That they are moving very much in the same circles. And in fact, Diana was playmates with Prince Andrew and Prince Edward, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was, because Park House is on the Sandringham estate, and that's where they lived before they went to Althorp. So she would go there for sort of tea parties and to watch films, and so they weren't pally, but they were there. But Diana used to kick up; she didn't really want to go there.
Right.
But they were friendly, and of course her father was an equerry to the Queen's father, George VI, and also an equerry to the young Princess Elizabeth then when she became Queen.
So very close ties. So meanwhile, let's part Diana for a moment, and let's go on to Charles, who at this stage is living this incredible, very high profile, very fast life with the polo and this sort of internationalism that seems slightly at odds with the king that we see now. But he was also linked with so many girlfriends, wasn't he?
Well, he was linked with Diana's sister.
Well, this is it. This is where I was
Sarah
going.
McCorquodale, as is now. But I dispute what you said, that Charles didn't love Diana. He did love her. In the beginning, he did. I saw this at the tea that we had at Buckingham Palace. He couldn't keep his hands off her. It was darling this and darling that. No, you're not going to put on that sort of show. You're not that good an actor to put on that sort of show.
No, I agree with you, Dickie.
Yeah.
He did love her, but he didn't love her the way she wanted to be loved, which was, eternal love.
Yeah, I think probably because of the 12-year age difference, because she'd been so disappointed with her father marrying Rain, that she might have looked at marriage and Charles as a bit of a father figure.
Well, that's my big aha moment, because I think this is another thing that we forget over time, that there was such a big age gap between the two of them, and also an enormous experience gap. There's
an intellectual gap is as big as that.
There's gap upon gap upon gap upon gap. But this is an authority figure. This is the Prince of Wales. This is the future king. As you say, and I completely can see this, that she must have seen a sort of there must have been a kind of a slight patriarch association with him. Maybe not father figure, but certainly he is older. He's much more travelled. He's much more powerful. He's much more wealthy, and you can see the boundary blurring a little bit, can't you?
She felt protected by him.
Well, absolutely.
So much so that on one occasion when he left to go on a royal engagement, she got hysterical. Please don't leave me, please don't leave me. And I mean, Charles didn't understand it at all. Why would he? No. Suddenly his young wife was getting hysterical because he was going off on a royal engagement. So this insecurity.
And yet for her, she's had these abandonments before.
Of course she has,
her
yes.
mother has abandoned, her father abandoned her for another woman, for Rain. So her next protector, her alpha, is now going away.
You've got another job as a psychoanalyst, I think.
That, unfortunately, was the problem, that she hadn't lived life.
No.
She had gone to finishing school, from there to Little England kindergarten, from there to becoming engaged to Charles. There was no life. You take
but wasn't
a sister-in-law.
that the point? You see, this is the other thing that we find so surprising, because after Kate and after Meghan and after everything that we've been through in the last sort of 20, 30 years, actually the point that she had no life before was incredibly important to the way that the palace was structured at the time. Let's not get too involved about the whole virginity thing, but certainly the lack of embarrassing boyfriends must have been something that made her more attractive.
Yes, quite obviously that was a factor in the union between the two people. But she hadn't lived life. She hadn't had experience of life, and that was probably one of the problems. She had difficulty in conversation. She slow start in her charity work, and she needed a bit of a hand-holding in doing it. The palace bent over backwards to help her. I know in my time, before I joined the palace, I gave her media training. I asked her pertinent questions that, when I went back to the office and said, well, I've got this, I did this media training, and I asked, did she breastfeed her boys? They said, you can't ask a royal that. I said, well, I did. And she answered, and she did breastfeed. But it was a difficult time for her, because nobody was actually guiding her exactly what to do. She's been given help, but there's help and there's help. And in dealing with the charities, you're thrown out on your own. You've got a lady in waiting, who's not necessarily a woman of the world either. And you're
there to hold
floundering.
your handbag.
So, Dickie, sorry to ask this question, but it's so interesting. Was this before you joined the palace that you gave her media training, or was it when you got there?
No, this was before I joined.
So when you were working for LBC?
When I was working for, and also when I was working for LBC, I had the first one-to-one interview with her, where I could ask her anything. And she was great on that, because that was about 1986, and she was beginning to find her feet.
Yeah.
But it took a while. Not only that, no sooner had she got married, she was pregnant.
Yeah.
She got married in at the end of July. She was pregnant in November. So that is cause for concern.
I think the other thing as well, that, when you look back on it, the royal family as an institution were going through a tremendous series of changes as well anyway. Inevitably, this is the joy of the royal family, is that it does keep changing, it does keep moving with the times, it keeps evolving. But this was a particular moment of, historically, it's going to have to change from the very reserved, very implacable, iconic figure that it used to be, this sort of untouchable, into something that's more human, into something that's more engaging. And she's sort of caught in the teeth of that in a bit, isn't she? I mean, she's even less protected.
I think she is. And the Queen used to say, treat her very gently, and then likened her to a nervy racehorse, which... and she told all her staff, treat Diana very gently, but Diana didn't really, you'd think she would, coming from this aristocratic family, and she didn't really know how to deal with the Queen. So she used to call the Queen Brenda, after the Private Eye satirical little stories. So she thought it was really funny to call the Queen Brenda, and I suppose it was very funny, actually.
But I think the other thing is, again, this is something that's coming up a lot, and very much at the moment, from what's been happening with Meghan and the pantyhose, and about this idea that the palace sort of steers your every move. Does the palace steer your every move? Does the palace tell you, as a new princess, what to do, what to wear, where to go?
Well, they don't. I think that's part of the
that's
problem.
The point.
They don't.
Yeah.
They don't. To a large extent, it's common sense. And if you've been brought up in a certain way of life, you know what to do and what not to do, and you know what to wear and not what to wear in certain company. And Diana certainly wasn't told what she could wear and what she couldn't wear. Sometimes she wore skirts below the knee, sometimes above the knee. Nobody sort of harumphed in their teacups and say, you can't wear that. But no, this. When you go across the Atlantic and listen to that lot in Montecito, believe that, you believe anything.
But of course, there's a culture where it is that controlled. You can imagine that actually, even if you work for a company out there, there's this sort of corporate thing that you have to buy into. This is one of the great problems, I suppose, of something like an institution like the British royal family, in that it's based on tradition, but it's a tradition that needs to be reinvented. It's based on the way that it's always been done, but of course
it's evolving daily.
It does need to evolve, and some things do and some things don't.
So I remember Fergie, sorry, your friend Fergie, saying that there's even an etiquette of who goes through the door first, and she explained what it was like when she first went to Balmoral. She was so confused about what to call everybody that in the end she curtsied to everyone, even the dog. She thought it was easier that way.
Even the gatepost, just in case. No, for sure. I mean, but the interesting thing I think that then starts to evolve with Diana is that, yes, I mean, tragic that the marriage didn't work out. What you must, I mean, you were there, weren't you? I mean, you saw these
It was
cracks
tough. I mean, we had
emerge.
to put on a brave face, and there were constant questions from the media. Are they okay? One of the things that happened that really spelled the end was we were in South Korea, and one journalist, the late James Whittaker, asked the private secretary, who I won't name in case he's embarrassed, are they okay? Is the marriage okay? And he said, every marriage has problems. Well, that's manna from heaven as far as a journalist is concerned. And it is unfortunate, but there's nothing written to say that marriages last, even in the royal family. And if they don't work, they don't work. And it's no good hanging on by your fingertips, trying to make them work. Slightly different in the royal family when you're sending two people out together to do a job. But it's very difficult for the two people to coordinate, and the body language just doesn't exist. And for better, for worse, the best thing that happened with them was divorce, because after divorce, they were actually able to talk to each other.
They both became much more, the word that's been bandied around a lot at the moment, became more authentically them.
Right.
There we are.
I think that the problem, one of the problems was, certainly for the monarchy, the Queen as head of state, was that Charles and Diana's antics or goings on in their lives were taking up the headlines of every single newspaper, even the Times and the Financial Times. They were every newspaper.
Well, they were defining the monarchy, weren't they? It's as if the monarchy wasn't doing anything else.
Exactly.
This was one of the big problems that we had, because we suddenly opened the paper and there was something, and think, hang on, what's this? Yeah. And I'd phoned Diana up and said, what is this? She said, oh, sorry, I forgot to tell you. Yeah. And that happened time and time again. They would go off and do things. Charles was also, not so much him personally, but his staff would occasionally pick up the phone and call an editor, and you'd see a story in the paper and you think, well, how did that get there?
Let's wind back to the beginning slightly. So, as you said, Dickie, Charles had been going out with her sister. On paper, this was the most extraordinarily wonderful, magical fairy tale, historical fairy tale romance of them getting together. Wasn't there always something that felt a little bit hurried about it? I mean, there was a sense that Charles needed to settle down. Charles needed to, you've got to get on with it, you've got to settle down. There is this beautiful, untouched, lovely lady waiting in the wings that suddenly almost like, comes straight out, not in any way prepared. Suddenly she's right in the middle of this incredible paparazzi scuffle, which of course we'd never seen in this country before. We hadn't had things like the photographers chasing her down the streets of Kensington. So that was a very kind of continental thing.
I think the Queen actually thought that it was all going to finish, and she was absolutely horrified when it didn't finish. And she called a meeting of editors at Buckingham Palace and said, please leave Diana alone.
Yeah.
And even when she goes out in Balata, the little village where Balmoral is, people followed her. Paparazzi or photographers, let's say, followed her when she went to buy some sweets. And I think one of the journalists said, "Well, ma'am, can't she send a footman to buy sweets?" And she said, ignoring that remark, she was very cross.
She said, "I have never heard anything so pompous in my life," and she turned her back on him and walked away.
There we go. But there was definitely. I mean, it's extraordinary your experience of being there with them, despite the fact you didn't have cake, but at least you had tea, before they got married. But there was that moment where the engagement was announced, and she looks incredible. She's beautiful, blushing, vestal. But he is so uncomfortable in his skin. And he makes the most extraordinarily, almost like non-committal remark about whether he's in love or not.
The difficulty he had is that the royals were brought up, particularly that generation, the generations before, not to show emotion. Now, the first thing that Diana did, I was there in the palace garden as a reporter, and she linked arms with him. Now, nobody had ever done that before, not even when he was dating Sarah McCorquodale. It just didn't happen. And so he felt uncomfortable with this sort of display of emotions. And then when the BBC reporter said, and I suppose so much in love, and she said, of course, and he said, jokingly, because you've got to look at the expression on his face, it wasn't said with a frown, whatever in love means, because he'd never been confronted with anything personal like that before, because you just didn't talk personal to the royals.
There's something sort of, there's almost like the beginnings of the tragedy in all of that. You know, it's like watching an opera. The floor is beginning to set in. That there she is, so emotional, so instinctive. You know, so able to
leaning on him,
touching him. You know, being in love. And there he is, basically pulling away, you know, and a remark like that. Yes, of course, it's, you know, you can see that there's humour behind it, but it's a distancing remark, isn't it? It's a saying, I'm not going to actually tell you what my true feelings are, and that's like a rather kind of mic drop moment in their relationship, because from then on it just seems to get worse and worse and worse. That the more she wants from him, the less he seems to be able to give to her.
Absolutely, and when apparently. He teased her a little bit after that photographic session and sort of pinched her and said, getting a bit tubby, aren't we? And then she, whether this is true or not, but in her head, that really exacerbated her bulimia, which she already had. And that's when she got incredibly thin, because he teased her about her weight. So she was very sensitive.
Particularly for him. If we buy into this idea that, you know, her knight in shining armour, you know, the prince of her dreams, is going to be a very kind, genial, spoiling authority figure like the father that she adored. These are not kind things, are they? These are not kind remarks at all. A much more robust woman would be able to just swat its hand away and say, "Oh, for goodness sake, don't be so appalling."
Yeah, what about you?
Remember, she was 19.
Exactly.
And very inexperienced and very immature. What is interesting is that Charles was intellectually far more advanced than she was, but by the time of her untimely death, she was pretty well read.
Yeah.
And she was pretty robust in able to cope with most things, except, of course, the paparazzi.
Well, yes, because I think the sort of the transformation scene in this isn't like a Cinderella thing where it's just about putting on a dress. Actually, it's growth into a much more powerful, much more thoughtful, much more in charge human being. But there's a very bumpy patch in the middle, and it's around about things like the Martin Bashir interview. Because there's one thing to be being frank and authentic and talking about your feelings and stuff like that, but to be talking on that kind of level about how awful it all is was really quite shocking. Well, you two must have been very shocked at that.
I was very shocked. I just thought, well, this is certainly the death knell of her marriage, which in fact it was. Yeah. But I think, as Dickie said, that Diana had progressed hugely intellectually, and when she was interested in a subject, she'd read everything about it. She studied things that she was interested in, and even if she wasn't interested, she studied them so she could become interested. She was really interested in religion, and she was really interested in not just AIDS, but all kinds of different illnesses, and she read up about them. And then with her charities, she really did a lot of homework. And I think this all passed Charles by because they weren't really seeing much of each other by that time. And I don't think he realised that she'd grown into this completely different woman than the one he married.
But because, Dickie, I mean, this is very much your era as well. Yeah. You know, because it was two camps, wasn't it? It was two warring houses. It was Montagues and Capulets.
It was very much two camps. But I want to raise one point. I remember still reporting going down to a residential home for partially sighted and non-sighted people. And she spent quite a bit of time there. This was her coming out of everything. And on the way out, there were two people sitting in the lobby. One was a woman, one was a man. They weren't related. And she stopped to talk to the woman, and then she stopped to talk to the man. And tears were rolling down his cheeks. And she crouched down and said, "What's the matter?" He said, "I can't see you." And she took his hand and put it on her face, because that's how blind people can sense a person. But moving on a few years, a year after I joined, she went to New York, and that's where I think she found her feet, because she had some meat in the engagements, and she was on her own. She was not in somebody else's shadow. And she had a tremendous visit to Harlem Hospital, where she spoke to a doctor who was very much on the AIDS front. And this doctor said to Diana, given her previous experience in the Middlesex Hospital, shaking hands with an AIDS patient, first time that had happened, and dealing with AIDS charities, this doctor said, "You have done more for this disease than our so-called American royalty." And that was quite a compliment. Not only was she a doctor, she was Republican Irish, and the American security services were a bit worried that she was Republican Irish, but they needn't have worried, because this woman was terrific with Diana, and Diana took in every word she said, and they had a meaningful conversation.
Yeah, I mean, this is, the power of the woman by this stage, to have done all of this research, to have done all of this homework, but then to still be so powerfully emotionally engaged that she could do something as impromptu and as beautiful as just kneel down in front of a live person.
And most things were impromptu.
Well, of course they were. You can't script something like that. Yeah. But for the other camp, for the other side, that's an appalling breach of royal protocol. The idea of a royal kind of kneeling in front of a commoner and allowing a commoner to touch their face.
Diana was tactile.
Very tactile.
Very tactile, and that came out in everything that she did.
So was there a sort of a, when something like that happened, on Charles's side, was there a kind of like, oh my goodness me, what are we going to do? How are we going to trump that? How are we going to have our moment?
No, there wasn't a competition.
No.
Diana made it a competition.
Right.
But Charles wouldn't compete. It wasn't a competition as far as he was going to. He played it straight down the line. And you've got to give him credit for that.
But he did do the Jonathan Dimbleby interview.
That was after the Andrew Morton book.
Yeah, okay, later.
In 94. Morton was 92. And the genesis of that interview was, it was supposed to be about Charles and his Prince's Trust. He would drop in with various comments during the 1 hour doco. They would talk to people who'd benefited from the Prince's Trust. Idris Elba is one of them who benefited with a loan from the Prince's Trust, to get the actual people who'd been helped. And then Jonathan Dimbleby said, it's not going to work. And one of Charles's private secretaries, who was a bit Machiavellian, no, he wasn't a bit Machiavellian, he was very Machiavellian, he moved the goalposts. So we got this interview, and I said to him at the time, "You realise this is going to be warts and all. Is he prepared for that?" "Oh yes, His Royal Highness is always prepared." And everything this guy said was always prefixed with His Royal Highness. And he wasn't, because that was a 90-minute interview. And what do you remember from it?
I know.
His admission.
Exactly.
That's all we remember.
That's all it was. Yeah. And yet all the good, all the power, all the change that he was affecting, all gets blown out of the window by that one thing. Yeah. But it is extraordinary. This is a lovely, lovely conversation to be having. Because here we are, 28 years since she died. And there's a sense sometimes that her iconic status becomes quite fixed. That, she's a kind of a star in the firmament. And we kind of forget about the backstory. And we forget about the subtleties. And we forget about the innovation. We forget about the woman. And we forget about the backstories. We forget about the reality of where stuff comes from. And I think, for you to say that she's one of the most insecure people that you knew is a really important moment, because that brings a humanity to her. And I think the conversation that we're having about where that insecurity comes from is so powerful, because it's from places that everyone can recognise. This is not. This is not a sort of a distant thing at all. This is family politics that have gone slightly wrong.
What is interesting from what you've just said is that the Waleses, Charles and Diana, they were married, but they lived in separate places. She at Kensington Palace, he at Highgrove. It was a fractured family. The embodiment of that family we see in the current Prince of Wales, in William. He was brought up in that environment, and he's making damn sure it's not going to happen to him, and he's doing an incredibly good job at it, because he truly loves Catherine, and he loves his children, and they are a together family. But it all stems from what went on in that family.
It's quite interesting in a way, because there's a sort of something a bit concyclical about it. This moment where Earl Spencer, her father, starts having the children down to the dining room and they're all eating together after the mother has left. With the current Wales is now the fact that they're talking about moving into this much smaller house, that they're not going to have live-in staff. There's a domesticity that is coming into this that is incredibly powerful.
Well, I think William is very strong, and as Dickie said, that they actually do have an incredibly happy marriage. But they've both worked at it, and in a way that Charles and Diana seem to be incapable of doing.
And they're not competing against each other,
No,
except if there's a bit of a competition, like a rowing competition.
Oh, physically, they're forever
physically,
kind of challenging each other to.
But they are a unit, and looking back again, you forget that there was this War of the Waleses.
Yes, there was.
And it was really, it was just almost getting crazy. I remember right towards the time that when Diana went out with Dodi Al-Fayed and was on the yacht with him. I mean, it was just taking up every inch of space, and everyone was talking about it. And it was on great big billboards everywhere. So it sort of dominated things, and it was coming to a crescendo, wasn't it, Dickie?
Yeah, the point I would like to make here, because you mentioned the War of the Waleses, indeed it was a War of the Waleses, and in those days everybody was saying, and everybody was writing in magazines and newspapers and television, oh, Diana's a terrific parent. There were two terrific parents. Diana gave them the high street, gave them the hamburger joint, the department stores, the bookshop, the cinema. Charles gave them agriculture, the environment,
And I'm sure both boys would say that
very
readily.
They were both very good parents. The only problem is they didn't live under the same roof.
But just sort of flipping back to the whole War of Wales thing, and you were saying about the iconic photographs of her being alone on the diving board. There was a bit of contrivance in all of this. There must have been.
Oh, it was contrived.
These are big images. Even
she told the Paps where she was going to be.
She did, yes, and she posed on the diving board.
That was a pose. Everything she did when she was away with Fayed was a pose. She told the Paps where she was going to be, what time she was going to be there, and there they were, click, click, click.
Which is a power, having been there. Suddenly she was calling the shots. So rather than that
but
being
they were making the money.
They were making the money, but rather than that being an accidental photograph that they had stolen from her, she actually commanded them to be there. And I think that is, that's the big trajectory, isn't it? From the incredibly insecure 19-year-old who's being chased around Kensington with photographers knocking toddlers over that she was supposed to be looking after, to at the very end of her life being in a situation where she can click her fingers and she controls how she is presented.
I don't think she did, absolutely. And of course she did. Everything you're saying is correct. But I still think there was still some fear inside her. There really was, and she never quite knew. Like when she sold her dresses at auction, she still didn't really know that it was going to work for her, and it was William's idea. Mum, why don't you sell all those dresses you never wear anymore?
She wanted to be loved. She wanted to be noticed.
So that is an insecurity.
It is an insecurity.
Well, we all want to be loved and noticed.
Yeah, but we're not insecure. The one thing about that holiday with Dodi, she'd been on holiday to the south of France on the yacht with the old man, the late old man. And boys went up to Balmoral. She was alone at Kensington Palace. She hated being alone. Her friends were away. Now, she was not going to be happy rattling around in Kensington Palace by herself in August. And this invitation comes up and she jumped at it.
It was. And then it all ends.
It all ends
But
tragically.
The legacy continues, and I think this is the big thing. And conversations like this just go to show that legacy keeps moving, keeps becoming even more powerful. The more we find out about her, the more we find out about her as a person, I think the more powerful what she did become.
The legacy continues with William, to a lesser extent with Harry, but there is still a need today by the media to run photographs of her and to link anything that William or Harry do to her and what she did in the past.
I think that her power, as he was saying, her power is still there. Because people don't remember the bad that she did and the way that she dissed the monarchy. People don't remember any of that. They just remember this beautiful golden woman that did so much good and that could kneel down to a child or a blind man. And that is so magical and so powerful. So much so it actually unnerved the Queen because she realised that the power that perhaps even more than Diana did herself. I'm not sure that Diana really realised the power that she had, but the Queen did, and it unnerved her.
Somebody who knew her incredibly well, said to me at the time of her death, this was probably the best thing that happened to her because she'd never have coped with old age.
Well, it also, I mean, it made everything about her so much more powerful. The fact that it ended so tragically, you know, and it's the thing that we could all remember, you know, it becomes fixed in, you know, our lives are actually all geared around that one day, aren't they? We can all remember when that was. Absolutely extraordinary. Amazing conversation. Thank you so much for that. The icon that is Dickie Arbiter and the goddess that is Ingrid Seward.
Thank you.
The goddess and the icon.
The goddess and the icon. I'm quite exhausted after that. But listen, thank you so much for watching. Please keep the conversation going on our socials. Just search True Royalty TV. Thank you very much and see you next time.